we will give. It's 10:05. Let's go. So this thing said recording has started when we first called in. So question mark. But I don't see anything that says record, so I'm going to assume.
No, it says recording is on.
Nailed it. Recording is on.
Oh,
right.
yeah.
I feel confident that this is being recorded. Welcome to this week's PWA Studio Community Sync.
Should give him an address.
Yeah, that's right. I need to do a Wilcox impression.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I don't know. Does he have any
He does
catchphrases
that,
or anything? He's got this. But that's really all I got. It's doing that dice rolling thing a lot.
Just relax.
That's
Go like nighttime jazz DJ.
Oh,
Yeah.
Will. Steven's got the perfect voice for
On the
that.
5s and 9s.
All right, so we demoed a lot of things that were close to the finish line last week. So we don't really have a lot of demos today, but we do have a very exciting in-depth discussion demo from Monsieur Zetlen here. Extensibility, plugins into PWA Studio. Specifically right now, there's a PR up for Page Builder. So I dropped that in the chat if you want to take a look at that PR to kind of inform this discussion, but I will hand it over to you, sir.
Well, thank you. Hold on. I am turning on Do Not Disturb because, suffice it to say, I have been being disturbed. Okay. Let me just sort of prepare everything since I was disturbed. Can you imagine? And then that. Okay. I will share my screen by plugging this thing in. So now get ready for another amazing gamble. If this doesn't work, I'll just share my screen.
Ready.
Okay.
Share in call. Excellent. We should probably do a sanity check. Can folks on the line hear us?
Sounds good.
Hey.
Okay. Hi, Eric.
Hello.
So Eric is a folks on the line. Just want to make sure that some of the people who've expressed interest in this are present.
Yeah, should we do a roll call?
No, I think we've done enough. So, hello, folks. Recently and very excitingly, Venia merged a wonderful pull request from the Page Builder team, one of the early contributions internally from a totally separate team. And Venia now supports Page Builder content. In that, it downloads the same file formats that the Page Builder storefront stuff in Luma uses, and it parses it and then renders each of the individual Page Builder content types as React components. This is huge because it's a dynamic way of rendering actual dynamic and behaviored content, your tabs, your parallax, your hero images. But there's one sort of problem with it, which is that it's built into Venia and you can't change it. So that is to say, if you are running on a open source Magento, then there's a huge pile of code in there, and that pile of code does get imported into your bundle, and that pile of code is never used. And I'll show you why it's never used. Because here's what the rich content component looks like in Develop today. This is the rich content component that is used in CMS pages and in CMS blocks to render HTML that might come down. You can see, first of all, that Page Builder is a direct dependency, and it's pulled right in as a sibling. As a matter of fact, in the rich content component here, which is in the Venia UI library, you can see there's this sibling called Page Builder. The fair amount of stuff in there. Now, to the team's credit, most of those are in fact imported dynamically. But I'm not going to dive in there and find where. But the point is, they're imported dynamically, so it's not a gigantic amount of dependency, but it's still some. So this was a great opportunity for us to pilot the extension program that we are working on. Right now, for instance, the scaffolding that comes out of VINIA is of limited usefulness, and I say this is the person who made it, because the VINIA concept that it copies is just a thin shell around the VINIA UI application. So those of you who have worked with Magento extensions and expect that kind of functionality, maybe have noticed that you need to manually put things together that are your dependencies, and that involves taking over a lot of code. So if you want to change, say, the checkout page, or you want to change some style variables, all that you can really do is copy and paste code from VINIA UI into your project. Not great. So we have two things. We know that Page Builder is really a modular piece that should be inserted into a given application if it's necessary, and we know that we need an extension mechanism in general. So in this pull request, we decided to implement the extension mechanism while building a useful feature on top of it. So that means that we have an extension pipeline. It's not fully built because it only has enough features to support Page Builder, but it does work today. So here, take a look at how the rich content component works today. It imports this Page Builder component, and then it uses this detect Page Builder function and runs it on the HTML that it receives, which is just a string check to see if Page Builder markup is in there, and if it is, it'll render Page Builder with that markup. If not, it's just going to do a dangerously set inner HTML. Nice. And the way that that comes in is because, the way that we've changed it in the pull request is something I can demonstrate for you here, and that is Page Builder has become its own. Can you guys see this okay? I can zoom in. Page Builder has become its own package. This packages folder is getting pretty crowded, and you can expect it to get more. This is how our project is going to scale. It's going to be great. VINIA UI it doesn't have any Page Builder stuff in it anymore. You can dive into this library and components and into rich content, and you'll see ain't no Page Builder no more. Some different stuff though. Plain HTML renderer. So rich content JS doesn't import Page Builder anymore. You don't see any mention of it, which is good because VINIA UI, in fact, does not have any mention of Page Builder in it either. So VINIA UI doesn't expect Page Builder to exist. It's a separate package. But down in its components, there's still a rich content thing. It imports a thing called rich content renderers, which imports a thing called plain HTML renderer. This is the fallback thing that just does the setting dangerously in HTML. You'll notice that it imports it and then exports an array of apparently renderers, and then those get imported into rich content as an array. And at render, it quickly iterates through that array, which is an optimized flow. And then for each of these components, apparently they're all supposed to have a can render and a React component. And so it asks the can render, and if it can, it renders the component. So this continues to support the dynamic rendering and therefore the dynamic importing paradigm that we want, because the new API for these rich content renderers implies that you can import this guy separately from this guy. Page Builder itself is a static dependency that can change in the future. This is just the first PR. So this is still a little bit of looping, but notably, you don't see that there's any call and extension type of code in here. It's still really simple. So right now, because there is no Page Builder mentioned anywhere, there's just this plain HTML renderer, which always says that it can render. And it exports itself as component. You'll notice that if I have my PWA Studio instance connected to Dave McCauley's CI Cloud instance, which has a bunch of Page Builder data on it, that it will, in fact, render the data. It just won't look very good. Page Builder storage format is designed so that it's still HTML, so even though we don't know what to do with this content and it doesn't look very good at all, it's still sort of usable. It's just as ugly. This is not what Page Builder is for, and this definitely doesn't look anything like it looks in the UI backend, where you are sort of manipulating the Page Builder WYSIWYG. So we need it to be higher fidelity, and we need the fancy-looking behaviors to happen. But we don't have page builder. So do we need to edit our Venia directory? Do we need to edit our Venia concept project? No, no, sir. We don't need to do any of that except for one little tiny file. And you don't even have to edit this file directly normally. You could do, say, npm, or is it yarn add Magento page builder. Now, I'm not going to run that command because that's not published yet, so it would look weird to you. But let's say that went ahead and happened. And we just added a line Magento page builder just to our package JSON. That's the only code change that we did, and it can happen based on a command alone. So having done nothing else to our Venia concept, let's run that watch again.
Install.
Well, I was just saying, like, right now we're all in the monorepo. So if I did an install, because this package hasn't been published yet, Yarn would be mad at me. So I can just add it because it's already linked. But you would run an npm install or a yarn install at that
We
point.
simulated it.
Well, I simulate. I didn't go that far to like publish an alpha or whatever. So, eat me. So notice again that the only thing that's different is page builder. But also notice that the UI is a lot fancier looking. There's not just the CSS styling that comes with page builder, but there's also fancy JavaScript behaviors because these things are individual components that can do their own individual behavior. Like, say, page builder's vaunted parallax effect. How is this happening? Well, you might notice that this file has been updated. And you might be saying, James, and I might be saying, yes. And you might be saying, I thought you weren't going to edit any code. And I would say to you, did you notice me editing that code? No. Because there's a comment up here which explains how it happened. This code was actually edited by the build process prior to being parsed and inserted into the bundle. The way that worked is, you look here on the disk, that hasn't changed. The way that worked is, we have a new concept that exists and is implemented down in our build mechanism in build pack called a build bus. And so individual packages, which are dependencies, direct dependencies of your project, in this case, Venia concept, can automatically interact with each other when you do the build. What happened here was that our package page builder, once it belonged as a local dependency, was automatically included in the build process because in its package JSON, it declares this new custom property. It says PWA Studio, which is a new custom property that we may put other stuff in. Targets, specifically, which is the concept that we're introducing. And for intercept of targets, it links to a file, a regular old JavaScript module. And so because it declared this, the build process will actually import and run this module, feeding it an API that you can use to retrieve and interact with parts of the build process. In this case, you can see that it is running get target, which returns something that you can run tap on. In this case, it's getting a target that's built into our process, that's from PWA build pack. That target seems to be called special features. When it taps it, its first argument is always an identifier for itself. I'm page builder, and I'm tapping, and I receive something called features by module. And in this case, it's appending that to the features by module object. And you might recognize this because this looks a lot like Venia concepts special in its Webpack config. And here, some of those special things are articulated, or they're defined right here in the Webpack config. But Page Builder, since it's also got CSS and ES modules, would also need to be a part of this. But we don't want to add Page Builder code directly to our project, so Page Builder does it here. Whoops. Whoops. And then, so it's getting that target and tapping that one. Then subsequently, it gets a target from the Venia UI package that is called Rich Content Renderers. Taps that, receives some API called Rich Content Renderers, and then runs add on it, passing it a component name and a package name, which again is itself. How does this actually affect the build process at all? Well, we've dog-fooded this. The build bus is inserted into the Webpack config that's automatically generated when you call configure Webpack. So again, Venia concept didn't need to add anything. It's still just running the configure Webpack method, but that appends a little plugin to the Webpack process which looks through and finds these declarations. And there's another declaration. Venia UI is also participating in this process, and it declares in its package JSON that it also participates in PWA Studio. This one has declare as well as intercept in its targets. This process is starting to have a lot of weird words in it. So let's zoom out and talk about what declare and intercept mean. In this case, you might have seen a diagram like this before. This isn't actually the good example of it. Let's find this one. So this is not precisely a representation of what we've implemented. This is more of a concept mapping, and in this PR, it's a little simpler. But the build process begins with this thing, the declare phase. And for each dependency that has that PWA Studio flag, it's given a chance to declare that it has these target things. Essentially, this is where it's stating its API. Rather than making this a declarative format itself, like just some package JSON stuff, we've chosen at this stage to make it regular code, like the code as config mechanism you get in like just config or webpack config. So each of these packages can say, I have a declare file, and that one is guaranteed to run before the intercept files. They'll also run in dependency resolution order. So looking at this page builder package, you might notice that page builder itself, as well as declaring its intercept, says that it has a peer dependency. So it expects the project that it belongs to also use Venia UI. And because it has declared that dependency, the build bus knows that it needs to run Venia UI stuff before page builder stuff. And that means that when page builder intercepts, then it knows that these targets exist by the time this intercept is run. So the declare phase runs, and Venia UI declares, I'm extensible in the area of rich content renderers, and it creates a thing called a sync hook. Fear not, this isn't another React hook. This is something we are calling a target instead, even though in the underlying library we're using tappable, it's also called a hook. This is something a little bit more akin to a strong, fast event emitter, but we'll go into that a bit later. Essentially, it just says there's a thing called rich content renderers, and you can subscribe to it. Now, what does rich content renderers do? Anything that has a declare file really ought to have an intercept file, because that's where you would actually make your hook do something and be significant in some way. So in this intercept file, Venia UI putting together a few functions, and then it, in its intercept phase, gets one of our built-in targets. You saw special features earlier. This is another target that BuildPack itself exposes called Webpack Compiler. And Webpack Compiler will execute when a compiler exists. So this is a place where you can add your own Webpack plugins or manipulate the compiler as you see fit. You might be familiar if you've looked at Webpack plugins like with this basic pattern. And you might also notice that the Webpack things also have tap on them. Yes, that's right. We chose this API because it already exists in our underlying libraries that we use. The Webpack compilation targets are the main way that Webpack plugins like interact with, why am I not seeing them? Oh yeah, these are compilation targets. Compiler hooks and compilation hooks are the equivalent in API to what we're calling targets in our own system. So because the Webpack stuff already has that, we've kind of extended that same paradigm so that it's a recognizable API. And it's a proven API because we know that it's exactly this mechanism where there's a bunch of stages in the build that you can tap into and do stuff to that has led to a gigantic ecosystem of useful Webpack plugins. So we expect the same ecosystem to be possible for us because of that. And when you're writing these things, you can tell that the same API will hold. Now, you receive this compilation. And here, I'm changing the subject back to what Venia UI does to make rich content work. Here, it hooks into a Webpack concept. This is something you can Google. It's, again, a common pattern. And this will run every time Webpack processes a new module. What we've done in our intercept is that Venia UI knows the path to its own little rich content renderers file. This is an implementation inside Venia UI, and so it waits until the module being processed is that file, and it runs. It creates a little API object with a single add method. It expects you to add a component name and a package name, optionally an import path. And then it calls its own hook, rich content renderers, its own target, excuse me. When it runs that call method, it is invoking anything that intercepted it. So Page Builder's interceptor then runs at that time. It receives that API, runs add on it, and says, add to rich content renderers, Page Builder component at me. That's our Page Builder. So after this runs, and that other packages file is automatically executed, this renderers, as you can see, has been augmented, and it now has an object with Page Builder in it. And so then we pass that Page Builder, we pass that renderers collection to a loader, which is another implementation detail. This is what intercepts and literally changes and splices together the source code of that file. Now this might look a little brittle to you, but the main thing to understand is that when Page Builder does its own intercepting, you might notice that it does not refer to any file inside Venia UI. The idea behind our extension mechanism is that individual packages, like Venia UI, don't let you modify their files willy-nilly. Now, if you super need to do that, there are secret ways, but we don't support that. Instead, we support the idea that a package like Venia UI will declare and expose named targets with APIs that you can call. So in the future, if we change the location of this file, then our tests for our targets will fail, and we need to remember that we have to maintain the public API of our target by going in here and changing how we intercept our own build process to add that. So that's how you got the addition of Page Builder, which iterates through and says that it can process this HTML and render. There's a lot more stuff, and I'm sure a great deal of questions that you might have. But the bottom line for this is that we now have an extension mechanism that feels a little like Magento in that you use your package manager to install an extension, and the rest is like magic. So if I missed something, I am sorry, but not that sorry, because we're already at half of the time. We have conversations to have. Any or many questions? Yeah.
So in Venia concept, for instance, we directly refer to Venia UI sometimes, like it just happens, like dot / etc. Yeah. Do we have anywhere in this page builder module where we are doing this? Because now that it's in a monitoring form, you can directly, like maybe they might be using.
Oh, you're saying a relative path to Venia UI /
If that happens,
we don't do
think
that.
it works.
We super don't do that. We used to, and we're mistaken.
Exactly, yeah, we used to. So for that to work, for this to work, you should never have these relative paths anymore, like into the packages that you actually want to use.
Yeah, I mean, this relative path for rich content renderers, I know I kind of skipped around a little fast, but if you're asking about this relative path, lib components.
No, this is fine. This is Venia UI.
Yeah.
No, I meant in Page Builder. Like if you are like now that Page Builder and Venia UI are in the same packages folder, like is there somewhere that someone would have mentioned like dot / Venia UI?
No, that's why the PR is 160 files.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
fixing all
You're
of
prompting
those.
me to show that.
No, I actually wanted you to mention it so everyone would know.
Everyone's like, go to water. Here's the water. Drink it. So you can see that Page Builder still consumes Venia UI.
Yeah.
In the future, we would like the Page Builder module to be independent of Venia UI, to maybe use some common components, but really hook into like Arrowgrid or something, so it's not bound to our own concept store. But for now, it's pretty heavily entwined with Vinia UI, so it does import things directly from it. And not just in tests. It imports things for its banner, like the classify and the button component. And so you can see that we've just changed those calls to calls directly to the package, since page builder is no longer relative to Vinia UI. So thank you, Remus, for mentioning that. And the reason that it's okay to call Magento Vinia UI from here is, again, that page builder in its package JSON does list that it has a peer dependency on Vinia UI, so that package is guaranteed.
Yeah, that was a decision, we just made while we were doing the page builder integration, right? That it would basically be kind of a superset, built on top of Vinia UI.
Yeah, this PR would have been larger if I tried to refactor that, because like something like classify, you could argue that really ought to belong to a separate library. Shall we expand the Peregrine scope to include like non-hook, non-Talon utilities, even though it already does? Do we want to continue that, or do we want to create another library? If we did, then we would have to make a new library for image and a new library for gallery, and I was like, let's keep the PR reasonable. But going forward, we can continue to refactor things that way.
Does this lend itself to patterns besides like it's kind of close to a composite, like you defined an API, and you can add anything, or an API interface.
Yeah.
And then you can just add it, and then it seems like once it hits page builder, it doesn't continue rendering, but like that pattern could also exist where like you loop through everything in the rendering loop.
Yeah, you can do composition, you can do anything because it's just code.
So it is just JavaScript. Could you do like full file replacements? I mean, that is, I don't know, that's kind of the issue with scaffolding now is like when you do want to change behavior or change the rendering of a component, you have to like recreate the entire tree to ease that. Like say somebody does just want to like replace a file.
Yeah.
Could that still work as well?
Well, we don't want to let people replace arbitrary files.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe in some packages, if you make like a little module that's like, here's my like 8 UI elements or whatever, and you can choose as the author of that module to expose a generalized replace any file in me concept. We're not going to do that in Vinia UI because you run into the Luma problem where since every file is like basically public API, since you can do fallback, anything based on Luma will expect all those files to be in their exact locations.
Yeah.
So the maintainer of Luma has this fragile base class problem. They can't change anything. So we don't want that to be the regular thing, but totally doable because one of the most common patterns in Webpack is basically to do exactly that. You can use aliasing, and as you saw from one of those hooks, like we can expose a target for other packages to mess with the Webpack config. But another thing you can do is use like one of the most common Webpack patterns is the normal module replacement plugin, which just allows you to add a little plugin to the pipeline that says replace this source code with this other source code.
Okay.
So if you want to, you could implement one of these inside your own interceptor right here, because again, intercept for Vinia UI targets works a lot like a Webpack plugin in that it receives the compiler from the Webpack compiler hook.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just thinking like through the common Magento workflow, it's like you look for the extension points, but then worst case, like I'll just replace the file.
Yeah.
So,
and
that still exists, but it's not like the suggested route.
Yeah, and like Page Builder could technically just do this. It expects Vinia UI to be there. It could do this. But that's fragile, in our opinion. It makes Page Builder dependent on a particular file. I say our opinion. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty arbitrary too. Like, I'm working on another thing. I was hoping to be able to sneak preview it of like another concept for extensibility where the API is like a style sheet in a CSS object model, so you can mess with it. That wasn't quite ready for prime time now, but like that's another example of a totally different way you could do it. Is you could make an extension that adds a preset little like curated pile of Webpack plugins. So somebody could make a, I did the best optimizer system of all time Magento extension that both like optimizes and compresses and gzips like output from Magento, and then also like changes the PWA so that the final bundle, like this compiler, gets augmented with new amazing compression plugin. Apply to the compiler, So it's pretty much exposing all of the power of Webpack, but in a way that's controlled and maintained by our own.
That's really cool. And yeah, that pattern is like Magento developers would be very used to it. Yeah, I think like price summary we just worked on. It's very fresh.
Right.
Where like we kind of have like a bunch of different totals that we want to display.
Right.
So if we made that like a composite and said, hey, just add your fragment and your component here, our app would like automatically pick it up and fetch that data and render it.
You are correct, sir.
It's pretty neat.
Thank you.
We would have some section in our documentation just like the Webpack. Here are the targets that you can tap into.
That's exactly right. And if anyone were to, let's be optimistic. When people build third-party modules that can integrate with this process, you would be expected, to publish those. And because our API involves like declare, instead of just putting stuff, like the way that Webpack works is you just grab compiler hooks, compilation tab. We do this little thing, which is a little different, so that you can have like a debug mechanism that sort of traverses that. Like you can see. You can change this so that it has like some digest output that explains like what different plugins did to different things. So this is kind of moving in order, saying here's what everything has done. So that's what if you have an API with accessors like we do, this can do that. Yeah. Lastly, I guess I should say none of this is happening in the browser, and a cool thing with JavaScript is that some of this stuff could, right? Like even though this is Node code, it's still JavaScript. But we're not doing that, not for now, because unlike some other extension mechanisms that are out there on the marketplace, we don't want to stuff all of the like extension resolution and management code into your device, into your phone. So we do this all at build time. So the problem of interceptors being really slow gets kind of ameliorated at build time. And at runtime, it's just this. Super easy to parse and understand. All right. Floor is open for community questions. With 7 minutes remaining.
It's only good until 45.
Oops. Is that worth pointing out? Like that was the interceptor and declare files. Those were node modules.
They were node modules, yeah.
So they're in Vinia, but they are not ES modules.
Yeah, so we may end up with a cool pattern where you can like import something from Vinia that you know is going to get like magicked. But it's definitely like always preferable to magic it at build time instead of like create some event emitter like one thing we're trying to avoid is like a DI mechanism into React components that would make React component developers like freak out. Like it's got to be really simple. We don't want to have to like expose a factory for React components that exposes a factory in its context. It's already enough to do hooks.
Anybody on the line have questions, thoughts, concerns, comments? Celebratory gifts?
Yeah.
Emojis?
Yeah.
Can
Can you sign my mouse pad?
When, I guess, what are the ideas for introducing this to the community? Is there going to be like a early adopter program, or how is this going to happen?
Everyone on this call has put themselves in the early adopter program, but for more formal mechanisms, like, this is a PR. Its acceptance criteria will probably not include like super full documentation, but our release criteria would. So we're talking internally about making sure that we do some manner of alpha dev coming to patch release so that this becomes available.
What about, so right now we have one extension point, or two if you, or or 3 if you count the Webpack ones as well.
Yeah.
So I mean, the community obviously will be like, everything needs to be extensible. Like,
Right.
how are we going to control like what's going to qualify as like a extension point?
Well, we don't need to. I think at least early on we don't. We can end up with like an EQP style system where we go, that thing is too intrusive to other possible extensions. Like, sorry, you can't go into the compiler and replace the file system. Not cool. But we do want to urge people to do this explicit registration thing, so that instead of, like, Magento's powerful in that all things can kind of be extended the same way, right? Like, you can write a DI file that just changes the way that the object manager works. And so that's because the assumption is that all of these extensions are going to use the same DI mechanism. That's just part of being a good extension. And this has some of that enforcement. Or like with themes, you can expect any theme to do file fallback. You can expect that there's going to be layout handles that things can target and change. That's just like the way everything works. And that's how it has to work internally as well. Which, again, that means that basically anything you do in an extension is kind of public API by default. Like, is there a way to register a layout handle that no one can mess with?
So a quick question. I'm sorry. So we have a few page builder adjustments or add-ons additions for regular Magento page builder. So what is the way to support it on the PWA side as well? So what we should do on the backend side and what we should do on the PWA side to create a new component.
Well, Randy, I won't put you on the spot, but Randy is wearing the marketplace team, and interrupt me if you'd like, but this PR for PWA Studio itself connects between installing an NPM dependency and having that new NPM package integrated into the PWA. But it doesn't answer the question of how the NPM dependency is coordinated with the necessary new Magento module so that they could kind of install together. And that's what the marketplace team is working on, and they have paradigms and mechanisms. I don't know how much you published to the outside world.
No.
Nothing yet? Okay. But they're working on the equivalent process where you should be able as a merchant to buy something on Marketplace, grab the entitlement to it, and then when you add that to your projects, you can both retrieve the component JSON dependency for the PHP code and the package JSON dependency for your PWA code, kind of using the same entitlement. So when you write your own extension that's supposed to support PWA, I think currently our assumption would be that you do the PWA UI in a separate package, which you can either publish yourself or you can use one of NPM's mechanisms for importing code from like a local file system or whatever. But that's still in process. We just know that we're going to make it easy to do.
So I think he's actually talking about one layer deeper. So they have modified Page Builder. They have
right.
custom content type. So I think the solution here, please correct me, I'm just going off of, I think I understand.
That's correct, yes. Yes, that's okay. Yes.
Page Builder would declare extension points.
Exactly.
Like right now, it loops through available content types. So you would intercept those extension points from the Page Builder module, and then you would just install your module as a dependency. Page Builder. Yeah, as well. So they would kind of layer on top of each other. And then you would just have to write React components to render your custom content types, and that would be it.
You are exactly right. I kind of responded to your question that mentioned the Magento part of the extension, just because I thought maybe one of your concerns would be how to put all of that code in one accessible place. But Tommy, you're absolutely right. That probably was the main question that you had, and that's exactly correct. Page Builder itself could declare extension points, and I'm just showing how that might work. API declare target. Sorry, where's the declares for Venia UI? Just making sure that we are sticking to
this naming convention now too.
Hmm?
Declaring I'm extensible.
Yeah, it's I sort of declare like targets. So declare targets will be called add content types. Maybe we would call it dynamic content types. And then we would make it this tappable library, which is necessary. You need to have a copy of it and say new sync hook. And there are other types of hooks. If you need to do asynchronous work, if you need to do work that passes a return value down through all of the interceptors, these things are really fast because they do code generation. And yeah, Revan was looking at it too. You can name the argument so it's easier to debug.
We had a talk yesterday, so that's what
He taught us all how to use
Tappable.
Yeah. Okay. So we've just declared that there's a sync hook, and then in our intercept, like take a look at the way that Page Builder's implementation actually does. Oh, whoops, I'm in the wrong place. Take a look at the way that Page Builder's implementation actually does this. Like it's got a config, and it imports all these content types like directly, and then it has content types config, and then for some of them, it's doing a lazy import. So this config.js is actually exporting that, a function get content type config that returns this stuff. So let's say that we added something that could just append stuff to this. Buttons config aggregator, yada, yada, yada. I'm just going to try to do it super dumb, super fast. In our intercept, it's intercepting this. We also would want to do a similar pattern to what Venia UI has in its interceptor. So I'm going to copy this, but bear in mind, this is something that that Fuman asked about. This pattern is like pretty verbose, but we will want to abstract this into a nice convenience function. But for now, we would take this and we would change it so that this goes to dynamic content types and change this to dynamic content types. This thing's name is page builder, and then we're going to kind of utilize this, and this lib components is going to change to lib. So now we pull this thing in, and our API would be like whatever that config.js is. Yeah, config aggregator, components, yada, yada, yada. Yeah, so and so when we call this thing, it should maybe to your third-party component that intercepts that thing, your third-party component would do something like et cetera, et cetera. And when you've done that, then our implementation in Page Builder would manipulate this file so that it simply included your declaration in the final build.
That's cool.
It's very cool, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll definitely try it, or at least make some experiments.
Great, excellent. You were going to say?
I was just going to say, we talked a little bit about this. Maybe Randy can chime in here too. But is this scary at all for us as third-party extensions come in? Won't we have to have some sort of verification process that if it is a waterfall hook or something like this, that they're being good citizens of our plugin ecosystem?
We definitely will have to have that. I have been the guilty party in some of our analysis paralysis, so I think we know we need to have something like this.
Yeah.
And we also, that's part of the reason that I chose a known good extension paradigm today. Webpack has had some migration issues when it's moved from Webpack 3 to Webpack 4. The API for extensibility totally changed, and many plugins got away with it. They were able to migrate successfully and support 2 versions. It's not easy, but since it's proven, I think we have a road we can travel down to get to extension quality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'll have to figure out how do we write those test rules. I'm clueless at the moment, but we'll definitely have to get addressed.
Yeah. A nice thing about build time is that even though we don't really have strict content types, strict typing or anything, if your extension is totally screwing up and it's trying to add something that results in broken source code, your build will fail.
Right, yeah.
And that's, we had discussed about early on in our talks about adding extensions into marketplaces that we will install the package in npm or into our package JSON, and we'll build, and if it fails, we just stop. We can't go any further. So that's always basic. Implementing it, that's a different story. So yeah, we will, and maybe we go out in stages. At the beginning, we do the basic test of building, and if it succeeds, okay, great. The next iteration is how do we test further and go on and so forth. So, and we don't want to stop introducing this product or this feature into the world because we don't have all the tests written, but we want to have some coverage.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I'm curious to, I'm throwing this out there because there's a lack of knowledge, but with the proof of concept we had earlier on installing extensions from the marketplace store from our M2 instance into Venia concepts, what kind of tooling we can use, the tooling that we have, and then integrating with this new type of hooks. If there's anything we can provide and bring more value to merchants.
Sure. Again, because of that declarative API, we can instrument our plugin process, and like you saw the debug output, we could just as easily push some structured data to standard error so that you can do some more complex diagnosis of something that's going on.
It's exciting.
Sure is. Thank you, everyone. If you have more questions, I am increasingly available in the Slack for community going forward, because this thing is only valuable if people are excited about it and it makes sense to you. So if you have any doubts that you understand this, then you are important, and you should not be afraid to say so.
Should we have an open call for declarations? Where would you like to see the app extensible currently?
How about we just invite PRs for it?
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, totally, right?
We can maybe help with the first few, and then after that, after it's established.
Definitely. We're also working on better exposure of our current backlog to community. Some of it's internal, so we have some backlogged additional stories for this. We're going to be putting in some Peregrine Talon interceptors and stuff. So we will try to publicize that. For being an advocate.
Very cool. Okay, if there's nothing else, that's it. We're 10 minutes over, but that's okay. Important topic all around.
Yeah.
So thanks for coming. Smash,
Thanks,
honk, and subscribe. What else? You're gonna
Honk.
Recording.
Honk, smash,
Yeah,
and
I'm
Recording
gonna
has
wait on that
ended.
one. Yeah. Recording has ended.
Yeah.
Thanks, Zetlen.
We'll see y'all next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.